So, for example, in Xingyichuan, we have monkey. There are 12 animals in Xingyichuan, but the animals are not an animal mimicry style and manner of movement, but I rather use the strategies and tactiques of the animals with the overarching structure and movements of the art and the principles of the art. But then, over the years, that was one of the newer things that I put into my Tongguda was that the monkey actually made it just a little bit more monkey-like. A little bit more monkey-like than in most Xingyichuan. And I thought, why not? Because I apply it in more monkey-like fashion. If people go on YouTube and they write like Jonathan Bluestein animals, you'd find there's a video of mine showing free-form practice and application of the animals. The forms don't actually look exactly like I practice there. It's just a free-form practice for the camera and just free-form. I'm doing Rosho, which is the Xingyi equivalent, Bain Baguo equivalent of Toisho. Just moving just random wrestling of sorts with the students, and then I flowed into techniques from that. And then nothing in that video is rehearsed or planned, and neither my solo practice or my applications. And in there, I demonstrate the monkey, and anybody who views that would see, hey, but monkey is really monkey-like. It has gotten even more monkey-like since then. And it was amazing because we filmed that, and then in the image I used for the video, I saw, wow, I was up in the air, jumped in the air, and I was striking the student on the neck. And I thought, wow, this really looks like a macaque monkey. I really look like the damn monkey. I didn't even realize. And I went on Google and I found a nearly identical image, of a monkey in the air in that particular posture. And
That's awesome.
What is the idea with, the animals in Xingyichuan, to the best of my understanding? The idea is that in the midst of combat, you can change the spirit of how you fight and how your movements and energy feel to the opponent to match the energy of the opponent. So, for example, if the opponent is much weaker than yourself, then you can use the tiger or the dragon, and often the horse. If the opponent is much weaker than yourself and is also not that maneuverable, you can use tiger or dragon, which are very aggressive, offensive, and head-on, and go strength against strength. If the opponent is maybe slightly weaker than yourself but is mobile, maybe you use the horse. If the opponent is much stronger than you and is stiff, you'd use the monkey, because you can go around him and also climb him, use his arms like branches because he's strong and stiff. His arms are so strong, you can literally jump and cling to his arms and use them for leverage to whatever, often to hit his head, or to go around him by jumping and clinging on his arm, and then basically like a monkey grabbing a branch and then swinging behind the tree. You can do that with a very strong, tall person who is very stiff. But you got to practice that, of course. And the monkey actually encapsulates the Shunggua. In the model of the 8 trigrams, Shunggua is a trigram of wind. So the monkey, in my understanding, in Xingyichuan, even though Xingyichuan is constructed around the 5 phases, some people mistakenly call them the 5 elements. I think actually the Chinese, if you look at the character for Xing, I have come to call them in Hebrew the 5 walkings, I think basically if we were to be very accurate about it, it should be the 5 walking transitions. Like transitions to basically walk from place to place. 5 walking transitions. I think that was what was intended in the character Xing, which of course is the same Xing in Xingyichuan. The Xing is, in that context, is form, and Yi is intent. the fist of form and intent, and that is a whole other lecture in its own right. But I think the Xing in the context of Wu Xing and the 5 phases is the 5 transitional walkings. And so when I say Shunghua, I'm talking about the triagram of wind. This is like outside of the theory of Xingyiquan. But I identify the Xingyi monkey with wind. The way that wind moves, if you read about wind in the I Ching, in the Book of Changes. And I think that people also, if we digress a little bit, people misunderstand the union of Xingyiquan and Baguazhang. Like what? It's not just that, one has more circle stepping and the one is more direct and etc. And this goes more head on usually and the other one goes around. It's not just that. It's also because Xingyiquan took the theory of the 5 phases and worked with it and created an art that goes around that. Actually, the 12 animals. What is 5 phases and 12 animals? The 12 animals are like it's basically 10 earthly stems and 12 heavenly branches. That is the wuxing, the 5 phases, is like the 5 yin organs of the body, right? It's the lungs, kidneys, liver, heart, and spleen. Lungs, kidneys, liver, heart, and spleen. But in Chinese medicine, you branch them out to 10 because this is the philosophical numerical system that was used originally. So every one of the 5 is a yin and a yang. So the lungs go with the large intestine, the kidneys go with the bladder, the liver goes with the gallbladder, the heart goes with the small intestine, the spleen goes with the stomach. So together you have 10. So these are 10 earthly branches, 10 celestial stems. I was confusing the names. Sorry. I'm used to thinking about this like in Chinese and Hebrew and English, and sometimes I get confused about that. Okay, so
you're good. You're good.
So 10 celestial stems and 12 earthly branches. Okay, 10 celestial stems, 12 earthly branches. The 5 phases represent the 10 celestial stems. What are the 10 celestial stems? They are the planets. If we like this goes into astronomy and astrology, but essentially, we are all under the influence of heavenly forces. I think everybody agrees that we are influenced by the sun and the moon, but for whatever reason, people are not so keen to agree that we are also influenced by the other 5 major planets in the solar system that surround the Earth, which is what Mercury, Venus, Saturn. I remember them like in their Hebrew names: Mercury, Venus, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars. Mercury, Venus, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars. These are the 5 major planets that are nearest to the Earth that affect our life on Earth in different ways. Like all ancient civilizations believe that. It's just that nowadays we have very silly horoscopes in the newspapers. So we think, like these idiots write those silly horoscopes. I'm not talking about real horoscope. I'm talking about the shit in the newspaper. And they think, so this must be bullcrap. So astrology gets marginalized. Suddenly we're not talking about the planets affecting us. Suddenly it's only the moon and the sun. But actually, it's, in my opinion, in my understanding, it's also the planets. These are the 10 celestial stems. 10 celestial stems are these, like, in my understanding, these are these 5 planets and their yin and yang sides to them. Which some would say, and I would believe, that this is why we have the 10 major organs reflecting these 5 influences with the yin and yang to them. Okay. And now the 12 earthly branches. We have 12 months of the year. The period around the sun is segmented to our circling their sun is segmented into 12 periods, and the Earth's spin around its own axis segmented to 12 periods, and the actual movement of the Milky Way, of our solar system in the Milky Way galaxy. The whole of the solar system moving in the Milky Way galaxy is segmented into 12 periods of, what is it? can't remember the exact number, but the total cycle is, it's either, yes, it's 25,900 years. So, let's see, calculator. So 25,900 divided by 12. Yeah, that's, so it's almost 2,600. If it's 2,600 years divided by 12, that's 2,166, which you might recognize because it's almost 26,000. 2,166 is nearly about the number in 4K HD, right? Which is not, if you research it, you see it's not coincidental. But it's not exactly that because, but it's close. So periods of about 2,160 years. So around every 2,160 years, we completed another transition of the entire solar system in the Milky Way galaxy. And then some people say come under the influence of another constellation. Because the whole of the solar system is closer to one of these constellations. So that's my understanding. There, by the way, other interpretations, don't take my word on that, because there are many forms of astronomy and astrology. And that was all to say, Sinitran is actually a shamanic system that was intended to reflect the philosophical, astronomical, and astrological ideas of the 10 celestial stems and 12 earthly branches in movement form, and the interrelationship between the number 5 represented in its extension from 5 in yin and yang, so that's 5 times 2, because it has yin and yang, that's a 10. Mm-hmm. The 10 and the 12. Okay? And then Bhagwajan comes in with a different numerical system with the numbers in the power of 2. 2 and 2 times 2 is 4, and 2 times 4 is 8, and 8 times 8 is 64. That is, in my personal understanding, the system that explains the quantum level of the universe. Okay? And we see that the numerical system of 2, 4, 8, 64, that reflects itself in different places. So if we said so the 10 celestial stems, 10 main internal organs, alluded to in traditional Chinese medicine, 12 earthly branches, 12 regular meridians in the human body. But there are also 8 exceptional vessels, 8 extraordinary meridians, and they are associated with the Bagua system. And then the Bagua system, the 2, 4, 8, 64, where do we see it? We see it in the developing cell. The cell begins, in the human embryo, when the yin and yang come together, the sperm meets the egg, and the yin and yang came together and they become one, and the one then becomes 2 cells. And then they always divide to 4, and then 60, and then from the 4 to 16, 32, 64. This division happens 100% of the time in all living embryos. I think not even only with mammals. All evolved animals develop through this model of the Bagua. Where do we always also see it? We see the I Ching in the 8 and the 64 in the structure of DNA. I didn't find this. People found this decades ago. It's also evident in other systems. So the Chinese, though they're sneaky, because nowhere can you read about what I was just saying. It's not written about it's written about in numerous books about astronomy, astrology, and Chinese philosophy. It's not at all written about in any freaking book about Chinese martial arts, for whatever reason. And the sneaky Chinese, like this fella Sun Lutang, the famous Xing Yichuan teacher, and then also a Bagua and Taiji teacher, he knew all about this stuff, But he didn't tell us. He didn't tell us because they're sneaky. They want you to find out on your own because Kongzi, Confucius, he said, the good student is I give him a quarter and he comes back with the other 3 quarters. So the Chinese wanted us to figure this out. You know how many years it took me to figure this out? The person who actually exposed me to all of this was my dear Shifu, Professor Stephen Jackovitz, who's another genius. He's the wisest, most educated person that I know, not just in martial arts, Professor Stephen Jackovitz. And I started figuring this out under his tutelage. I was a Xing teacher for years before I knew this stuff. So, and a lot of people, most Xing teachers know nothing about this because you don't get any explanations. And most of the Chinese who teach Xing and Baguazhang and Tai Chi Chuan, they can't explain this. They don't know much about it. They've heard it a little bit here and there. It's like in their culture, goes in one ear, comes out the other. They heard it when they were 10 years old. They weren't old enough to understand because it's all freaking complex. It's really freaking complex. I read the I Ching. I guarantee you, the I Ching is like a post-PhD level book. It's not a book for kids. And you can't expect, most Li Lonang, the person who founded Xing Yichuan, was illiterate. How would an illiterate person be able to write about, he's illiterate, he can't write. So, and how is he going to explain things like that? He sort of knows. Of course he knew. Of course Li Lonang knew about this stuff. Now, by the way, one of the interesting things is in the history of Xing Yichuan, in Sini Liuhe, they had 5 movements, not in Dai Sini Liuhe, but in Sini Liuhe Chuan from the Hui Muslims. They had 5 basic movements and then 10 animals. Why did they move it? Why did Li Lonang transition from 5 movements, 10 animals to 5 movements, 12 animals? Because it was still in the context of 5 being turned into 10. He wanted a 5, which is a 10, and a 12. And that made more sense with the philosophy that, everything in China works around. Mm-hmm. And our martial arts are way deeper than people realize. People put insane stuff into it. And into Wing Chun. My Shifu, Professor Stephen Jackovitz, he says certain things about Wing Chun that I can't even say on this podcast because it would be so controversial. But, first, one thing he says, and I think that he would stand behind, he says Wing Chun was the art of assassins and pirates. It was an art, that was taught, we're talking 6, 7, 8 generations ago. It was an art taught by people who basically out to kill their business competitors. They're not nice people. And it wasn't made to be fancy because they weren't killing people in front of other people to make a show. They just had to kill them. And they had to train in tight spaces, and that is well known, of course. And he also says that, I don't know if it's really just his lineage of Wing Chun, and I'm being cautious here. I'm intentionally not mention which lineage and, his teacher and everything. Maybe it's just his lineage. Maybe, like he says, it's actually originally not in recent generations, but back then is many lineages. He says Wing Chun is strongly Buddhist. Not just paying homage, certain Buddha, certain postures you'd have this posture is called, making the offering to the Buddha, right?
Yep.
No. He says, no, there's a whole lot of Buddhist religion in the actual Wing Chun. And in some lineages, they still teach the religious part. But probably Yip Man, I know because his lineage also comes down somehow from Yip Man. I just don't want to be specific here. I don't know if Yip Man chose to not emphasize it and then his students do or whatnot, because Yip Man is always presented as having been a bit more secular. But Wing Chun in some lineages is very religious. It's literally, there's a worship of the Buddha through movements. Now, I'm not saying, this is not to say that Wing Chun is usually religious martial art. I think in 99.9% of cases, it is not. I'm just saying there's still lineages and sub-lineages like that. And that Professor Jakovitz would say, originally it was probably like that. And which is interesting how there are many sects like this in Buddhism. Buddhism is supposed to be about, all love and peace. And then, the Chinese got Buddhism from India and they're like, love and peace and kill your competitor. All works together. And then there's love and peace.
You got the yin and yang. Right? You got the yin and yang.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, much like the Chinese, when a lot of teachers brought in, they merged the Xingyi and the Bagua together to bring in those theories. So I did similar things, but not necessarily in terms of theory, but more so in terms of the many different types of possibilities, technical possibilities. So for instance, one of the arts that I studied is Shaolin Jinggang Basher. Shaolin Jinggang Basher is literally the Jinggang. Jinggang is a type of Buddhist deity, by the way, an aggressive, violent, warrior-like Buddhist deity. So the Jingang's Basher 8 postures of Shaolin. Jingang's 8 postures from Shaolin. This is an art that I studied. Maybe I learned about 20% of that style, but also I actually learned some of the most advanced practices because I was not taught the curriculum in an orderly fashion. From Shigong Zhou, my late Shigong Master Zhou Jingxuan, who's no longer with us, sadly, in Tianjin. So that art has a lot of stepping methods, which are very evasive, quite unique, that you see they don't exist in Xingyi Chuan, in Piguazhang, in Southern Mantis, in Bagua. Maybe, I think a lot of them do exist in the Li family system of arts that I'm studying now. By the way, my teacher in that is Master Brian Hall, who's a wonderful person. But it's very unique the way that this art moves around. If you were to go on YouTube and look for Zhou Jingxuan, Z-H-O-U, Zhou, Z-H-O-U, Jingxuan is X-U-A-N. Then there are many videos of him demonstrating that art, and you could see it moves in a very unique way. So all of these stepping methods, which are very combatively viable, some of them are close to Western boxing, were not present in any of the other arts I studied. And I thought, why can't you take some of the movements and practices from these arts and diversify them with these stepping methods? What they do, by the way, the core curriculum of Tongmu Dao is made of about 25 movements, and the students learn those 25 movement combinations. And I teach them how to take these 25 movement combinations and use them with numerous types of stepping methods. So you have 13 core stepping methods and then combinations thereof. And the idea is to make them as maneuverable, agile, pliable, like Western boxing. And after they could take 25 movement combinations, very simple movement combinations, but very effective, that encapsulate, most of the basic striking and base grappling that we do. They can take these 25 options times 13 different types of steps and master that. Then they have basically they have all different types of vectors, circles, and spirals that they could potentially use in martial arts. And then what I would teach them, and of course, in between, there are many, many things. Like there's a partner form to teach joint locks. There is some ground grappling in the way that they teach that, and partner drills and striking drills and all sorts of things. But basically, it's the core 25 movements times 13 ways to step. Once they can do that, and they feel that they can move very freely and eloquently with the martial arts in space, so they're not limited by, the framework of this or that form. There are no forms at that stage. Then they can get to what I call Hunyuan Chuan. Hunyuan Chuan is the name of the long form that I created that basically has nearly all of the curriculum. 95% of everything I know is in it. It's a long form. It takes 20 minutes to complete at a walking pace. So if you were to do, not a jog, but you pace quickly, on the street, if you practice the form at that pace, like semi-fast walking, it would take you 20 minutes to complete.
Wow.
And so that's something that I never had. Because I studied some Chen Tai Chi Chuan under several teachers, most of them colleagues of mine. And I found that these long forms they have in Tai Chi are very useful. So I thought, okay, so they have something like more akin to Western boxing, but way more diversified because it's traditional martial art. I teach them to move freely in space whilst retaining the core essence of the art. By the way, I said there are no forms. That's not exactly true because there's the joint locking form. And there's also a form that's sort of similar in concept to Siunim Tao that I studied from Master Brian Hall that actually teaches all the different hand bridges that can be used in empty-handed fighting. Basically, just every single hand bridge, like this,
Okay.
this, any hand bridge. So we use that, and it's also something that I use in more advanced level to teach a very advanced form of Qigong to put inside of that form. So that's like a type of Jibingong. So then they get to the Huiyan trend, that's long form, 20-minute form, and they stop doing almost everything and they focus on that instead. So they transition from the free-flowing to the long form practice, but they still work on applications, of course, and they start working more on the Neigong. So when I started Xing Yi Chuan, you were doing Jianzhuang, the standing practices from your first class. And I found this is not that helpful with modern Western students. I do work very well with it. Most people are not that patient enough, and it takes them too many years to advance. But by the time they've gotten to it after, say, anywhere between 3 to 6 years of doing the core art that I teach, they get to the long form and then they get to the standing, much easier for them.
Yep.
I do let them stand in Mabu a little bit, up to 10 minutes, just to get the hang of it during those earlier stages. And then after that stage, when they study the whole long form and they get all the Neigong that's inside of it and everything that I put in there, then the next phase is going back to stage 1, but you learn a whole lot. You learn the Bagua that I know, and you learn the Li family stuff that I know, and there's weaponry. Although sometimes if students ask, I would teach them the weaponry much earlier. Because as I wrote a chapter about this in the Martial Arts Teacher 2. The chapter is called Weapons Keep Students. I find that, students like weapons. So if a student is really keen on studying a weapon, if they're going to train hard enough and not let the weapon take them away from the empty hand, I'll teach them a weapon earlier. Sure, they can choose one of the weapons and we'd work on that. And so it's like the structure of shohai in Japanese. Regrettably, I always forget what it's called in Chinese, but they also have a term for shohari is the beginning, middle, and end of a traditional Japanese play. So that's how Tongbudao is structured. They go from the single movements and single movement combinations and taking them and practicing them freely. Also with a partner in different ways. Also, at these stages, there's a whole lot of work on partner drills and the Rosho, which is again different equivalents of the Tuisho that we have in Xing Yi Chuan in my martial art. Mm-hmm. There's a whole lot of that and a whole lot of applications. Then that's the Sho and the Ha, the middle. They go to the long form and then they go back to the single movement practices, because by the end of the day, as most traditional martial arts teachers know, the single movement practices are what builds the bulk of your skill and not the forms when you're advanced enough. So then they go back and they have a perspective, and they of course can still practice the form, and their weapons forms, they can work on that, but then it goes back to more emphasis on single movement practice. And then we completed that cycle. As far as I'm concerned, unfortunately, I'm not close to having been able to teach the whole curriculum yet. I think the average student coming in for like two classes a week would not even be able to complete the whole curriculum. But say if they came 3 or 4 times a week, that's probably going to be like a 15-year process. If they came every day, though, I do believe that someone who's coming in every day, I could teach them everything I know in 7 to 8 years. Mm-hmm. But alas, nobody comes every day.
Have you right? Have you worked on this model yourself? Have you used it in your own training, Jonathan?
Yes, of course. This marks my own progression.
Okay.
This is how I progress through the arts as well. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. I like it because it seems to me like it's globalized, right? So these small pieces mimic the long, have DNA, if you will, of the longer system in it.
Exactly. So the idea is that all of the spirals and circles and movement vectors that they worked on when they had these 25 pieces times 13 ways to move, this is all then reflected in the long form. And then what the long form does, it presents them with way more intricate ways to express these movements and movement combinations.
Okay.
Rather than what they do in Taiji Chuan, which is, especially in Chen Taiji Chuan, which is the opposite, which I'm so sorry for saying this, I'm not sure is the best teaching strategy, where they teach them the most complex, most nuanced things inside the form, and then trying to break it down to basics. It works for some people. I think it doesn't work for most people.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so with the West, is this kind of an approach? Because you had said you had been working on a lot of stuff for the Western student, and has this the Tongbu Dao been the answer, in your opinion, to synthesizing all of your work for a Western mindset in the Chinese model?
Short answer is, ask me in 20 years.
Okay. Sounds good.
But thus far, I can tell you that, I started with the Tongbu Dao curriculum. It was rather new and far from being entirely formalized when I started it about 4 years ago. And then shortly thereafter, maybe 8 months later, I moved abroad. And then I came back. But I find that nowadays it's much easier for me to teach the traditional martial arts to my students. Now, of course, there are many styles, I think, that have already built the curriculum in a way that is easier to teach to Western audiences, even if they did not intend it as such. For example, I think that Wing Chun is very student-friendly. I think that Wing Chun, in terms of how it condenses its core principles and ideas, is quite brilliant. It's one of the most brilliant martial arts curriculums ever conceived of, most probably. And this is part of why Wing Chun is so popular, simply because it has a superior curriculum structure. And people don't pay attention to that.
I started Wing Chun back in 1998 in college. And the class was run by the head of the mathematics department at Mesa in Grand Junction, Colorado. And his Sifu, which is my Sifu now, Sifu Mayer, was working on his PhD in educational psychology and cognitive development. And so he would really have a kind of a westernized approach to everything, but you were dealing with college kids from the ages of 17 to 23, and, all full, young, mainly male, full of testosterone, very excited. But he got our mindsets focused on these drilling patterns, and it was the learning process that really fascinated us, because you had 3 or 4 kids in the teaching program. You had a couple English kids. You had 4 or 5 math kids. You had kids that were doing sports psychology and performance. And so you got us at a point that we were doing something physical, but it was the learning process that fascinated us, because he would share some of his ideas on learning and the concept of learning. So I kind of have to agree with you. I'm kind of spoiled because I've got a teacher that taught how a system was presented to be learned as well as taught. And then we got to be guinea pigs as well in the process. But we were a part of a process of him getting his PhD from Texas A&M on it was drill-based performance over long-term learning and long periods of training. And so we would do these 3 drills for half an hour. And by the half an hour mark, because they were interchangeable, it'd be like Gong Lop, and then we have something called inside Pak Sao, This is a tip pak sao with an uppercut. And then we have normal pak sao, but they were all interchangeable. Like there was something that I could change to the bong lop, and then I could transition to the uppercut, and then I could transition back to this. And so any partner could transition at any point. And by the end of the drill, a half an hour, all the rookie students, their arms were down here. You couldn't recognize what they were doing. But all the people that have been with the system for like 4 or 5 years, there wasn't much energy on the arms, but you could still see it. But yeah, I think I agree with you. That's a long way to say I agree with you. Wing Chun is very approachable, very teachable, and very tangible.
I think as you were talking, I had in my mind, the manner of execution of Sionim Tao, the first form in Wing Chun. And I think now that's the first time it came to me that Sionim Tao actually hypnotizes the practitioner. I think that the people, because there are many strange aspects about it that can be explained, for example, by the religious connotations. And of course, it's also, for those in the know, it's a very advanced type of Qigong, which is not taught by 99.9% of Wing Chun teachers. They don't know the Qigong that's within Sionim Tao. But the point is, I think the form was also structured in a way that hypnotizes a person into the expression of the flavor of the style. And that is something that does not exist, for example, in my curriculum. So the first instance where and when my students experience something which is closer to self-hypnosis is with the Zhanzhuang, but that arrives later. The Wing Chun is designed in a way that right from the get-go, they are programmed to move in a very specific way to the art and not in another way. And this is something that Western boxing also achieves, but I think Western boxing achieves that simply because there's so few movements and possibilities, technically speaking, that because you basically repeat that so much that you become a thing. Boxers are a thing unto itself. And in Wing Chun, in Wing Chun, there are way more possibilities, but somehow people also become a thing unto itself through this process of the Sionim Tao self-hypnosis. I'm not saying maybe that's only the third or fourth most important function of that form, but it is there.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. I've done that form now for 25 years. That's weird to say out loud. And I still find connections. I feel very lucky. My Sifu Mayer, was the sole inheritor on the U.S. side from Wong Q. And Sigong Wong Q wasn't very well known. He actually worked for the British government as he was a civil engineer. And so he actually had money and he had some free time. And he was one of the first people to ever learn the Mokjong. But Sifu Yip Man didn't have a Mokjong at the time. So when Yip Man taught Wong Q the Mokjong at the beginning, he taught him to him as a partner form. So we have three kind of wooden dummies. The true wooden dummy, and then we have partner form A, and then we have partner form B, right? So it's a long 110 movement 2-man set. You've got the 110 on the one side, the attacking side. You got the 110 on the offensive side, so to say. And I
mean, that's an interesting story, but I've also heard that the partner form for the wooden dummy always existed. Other lineages say
it did. It did always exist. That's right. It wasn't made up. No, this was something that always existed. It's just the thing is, in the greater Yip Man world, it's been forgotten. And the reason that I think that it's so important, it shows a a bridge between the 3 unarmed forms and the wooden dummy.
Mm-hmm.
Because people don't realize that the wooden dummy is basically the other 3 forms unfolded like origami, right? So the other 3 forms are a folded up version of everything that's in the mokjong. And the partner forms are a living bridge between the unarmed forms and the mokjong. It makes it make sense. And so when I still do Sunam Tao, I see links to the dummy. I see links to our drills. I see links to the sticky hands. I see links to Chisao. I see links to the weapons. And so that's why I
would give, if it's probably, you know, in history there is a competing set of 2 theories between historians. Some say that the bulk of history is driven by the big man theory. That,
sure,
you know, once in a while comes a very important, very charismatic person, and either for good or bad, they change history. And some historians say, no, history is something that is driven by cumulative changes that happen through culture and society over time. And sure, sometimes there are charismatic leaders and influencers, but overall, it's more society. And it's very interesting to think, you know, was the Wing Chun curriculum really created by this one amazing person, or did it develop slowly and gradually
over time? Yeah,
over time, because in the Chen village, we do know that these forms evolved very slowly over time. Every generation made a few changes here, a few changes there. So there is certainly an organic change within the family that happened over a very long period of time. I would dare say that if the entirety of the Wing Chun curriculum was created mostly or all by a single person, I would give that person a Nobel Prize.
Yeah, agreed.
Agreed. For any martial arts, this is maybe difficult to understand for martial arts students. But if someone is a martial arts teacher and they realize like how difficult it is to just structure a basic form, to just have a form even begin and end in the same spot. It's so difficult that the teachers sometimes just give up. Like in China, there are many forms where they're like, oh, I start here and I end there because, who cares? Who cares? Even though it has use, I'll talk about in a second. My 20-minute long form that I created, it's 20 minutes long and it ends in exactly the same spot. And you go around a lot. And it goes all over the place. In diagonal lines and circle lines, and then you cross yourself and you even jump a few times here and there, all sorts. You still end up in the same place. So I was just saying, for someone to have created something like Wing Chun, I'm not saying there's no best martial art, but it's damn close to being the best curriculum you can find in terms of structure. Whoever created this was an utter genius.
Agreed.
Absolute genius.
Agreed.
The Bagua systems, like the Bagua in its modern iteration, Baguazhang, started fairly recently. So we're talking about, late 19th century, right?
Yep.
And also Xingyichuan. I mean, Xingyichuan is about 160 years old, give or take, the modern iteration by Li Longlang. The Bagua people are still working through the curriculum structure. Even if you look like perhaps the best structured, the 2 best structured Bagua styles that I've seen. Like the one that I've studied is the Qingcheng Mountain Bagua, which is a pre-Dong Haitren style. It's not well known. Qingcheng Mountain is in Sichuan, for Taoist lineage of, my teacher, Master Stephen Jacobitz. For his Shifu, my Shigong, Grandmaster Zhang Yuanming. That's one system. The other one is the Yin style Bagua of Xie Peiqi, which is taught by He Jinbao and his American students in the United States. These systems of Bagua have a most exceptional curriculum, really well thought out, and even they are still tweaking it. There are about 6 generations in, and they're tweaking to the point that Xie Peiqi released with his top student, who's now, Xie Peiqi is gone now, and He Jinbao is the head of the system in that style lineage of Yin style Bagua. And they recorded, in the early 2000s, they recorded a set of videos, it was already DVDs, showcasing all movements in their system. They don't show all the internal practices, but all movements and much of the applications, maybe most of the applications. And by the way, that set of videos, I think, is on YouTube now, because they have He Jinbao, at the request of his teacher, Xie Peiqi, he continued to tweak the system, and they continued. And now he wants to do a new set of videos showcasing the entire system, because 20-something years later, I think they did around 2000. So it's already different enough that they want to record a better set of videos. So They tweak. And the Wing Chun was already at the level of sophistication, if not more, than it is now 100 years ago. So that's how advanced it is in terms of curriculum structure. And also, I just briefly mentioned something that I gotta say, like the idea of, like, why would you even start and finish a form in the same place? I think it's very important, because then you know for sure if you fucked up or you changed something in the middle.
I like that. I like that a lot.
I use it. It's not as evident in the Wing Chun forms, because it's all in relatively tight spaces. But if you go about 20 minutes and you end, a few feet from where you started, you're like, okay, I fucked up. Where did I fuck up, and why?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can go on an investigation. Teaches you a lot. Even though, with things, I don't typically screw up with Hunyuan Chuan. I almost always finish at the exact same spot. But some other forms, like I might not do a weapons form for like a month, because I'm into other things. I'm also learning. So the newer stuff I give precedent to, because it's more important for me to assimilate that. And then I'll do a weapons form, and just because I'm creative, I might slightly, without even consciously thinking about it, I might change a movement to be applied differently within the form. And then I might end up like a step's distance from where I started. And I'm like, what changed from a month ago? What did I do here? And then I find the change. I find what the hell it was that I did. I find, maybe I should change it within the form. Maybe it made sense. Or maybe I should be careful. I should not make that mistake again. That taught me quite a bit over the years with different forms that I studied. Quite a bit.
How long have you been working, not to change too much, because we can even tie in the Lee family into how you're still teaching now, but how long have you been working into the Lee family system? And what do you think it's been brought to the table for you as a learner, as a continuous learner, and as a practitioner, and as a teacher?
Okay, so after having already met and studied some years with Master Stephen Jakovitz, my criteria for whomever could be my teacher was quite high. Because this guy studied martial arts since he was a teenager. He's now mid-50s. And he is a professor of Chinese medicine. He's fluent, conversant, can write, read everything in modern classical Chinese and modern classical Korean, and has studied and can teach Wing Chun, Aikido, Judo, some Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, I think. He even studied some Kogyu ninjutsu in a closed-door school, which was very interesting because they had very thin cloths on their faces. They don't even know each other's identities except for the guy who brought them into school, which is insane. And he said, Stephen says, "This is the best school I ever studied at because nobody knew anybody, so there's no ego." It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. And it was very intense. And so it's just Wing Chun and Judo and Aikido and probably some classical Jiu-Jitsu a little bit here and there. This is the Kogyu ninjutsu, which I don't think he can teach, but he said at that school for a while, and Iaido, which he can teach, and Shingi and Taiji and Bagua.
Ooh. Wow.
And did all of that while studying these 2 Asian languages, which like each one of these languages is a full-time job, and and he has 2 PhDs in Chinese medicine. And the dude is something else. He's an amazing person, and his martial arts are so high level. I was like, and the first class I ever had with him, which is funny, I'm mostly a student of his in Chinese medicine, Chinese philosophy, and also in martial arts, but I also studied a whole lot of martial arts from him, and especially in terms of theory and history and philosophy. And first class I ever had with him, he's in New York. I had to travel. He's basically like, we were doing Wing Chun. So he wanted me, even though I came for the Bagua, he wanted me to also be in the Judo and Shuai Jiao and Wing Chun classes. So I get a broader scope of experience, given, I've already studied many arts, so it wouldn't hurt me to, for a beginner to meddle with many styles, that's a bad idea. But for me, it's just interesting experiences. And we started with the Wing Chun. And in the middle of the class, we did some freeform Chisao. I was working with a student of his who was very good. I had a hard time with a student of his, and that student only had like a 5-year training.
Oh,
and
wow.
That student was good.
Wow.
So he was like, but I was playing with that student. I could push him back, but he was just aggressive. He was good. And so he probably saw me from the side, like sort of quote unquote bullying that other student, even though like I was nice, right? But it got intense, a little bit of ego between the 2 of us, even though his student is a wonderful person. Dave, he's a lovely guy. I really love that person. So then he says like, okay, now you do Chisao with me. It wasn't Chisao. He just kicked my butt. He just beat me up. But it's funny, it's also, so the guy trains like 25 years worth of martial arts, probably more than I, and he's 6'4" and I'm 5'6", and he probably has like 80 pounds more than I. It was a nice beating. It was funny. But I think he made the point of don't get cocky. You might be a teacher, but like, you don't get cocky. And the way he introduced me also, we had the Bagua class, and he says, oh, this is Jonathan. He comes from, Southern Mantis. So he doesn't know internal arts. We're here to show him internal arts. And he knew that I know. It was just like, you little kid, you're going to shut up and you're going to play along. And that was the message. So he's so good. And he's not that aggressive, by the way. He's, aside from these experiences, he's just the sweetest, kindest person. Really. He's a good soul. So, with that's sort of someone as your teacher already, I really wasn't thinking of taking on any other teacher for many years to come. I also felt that my cup was full, and it is full. It's goddamn overflowing, but I keep pouring in.
I get it, man. I get it.
And also, like, I got so much shit to practice, and I practice every day, and it's never enough. So, and then, so I get this, I called, buddy of mine, Chris Fleming. Where's he at right now? I think he's back in Pennsylvania. Chris Fleming is one of the, more serious martial arts dudes, that I know in Chinese martial arts. He's not a teacher, but he has been practicing like 20 something years. He's going around, he's studying with many teachers, studied many different Chinese styles. And Chris is also a big dude. He's 6'4", 6'5", and he's a bulky dude. He trains hard at the gym, and he spars regularly with a lot of different people. So he is always looking for those hidden dragons in the martial arts community, people nobody's heard of, and might be special. And he went and he found this guy, Brian Hall, in Boston, and he went to visit him. Chris is a very devout guy, Chinese martial arts. He goes and he travels far to study with different teachers. Mm-hmm. So he went to check out his Iron Palm, and and the conversation he was telling me, I went to see this Brian guy. I said, I'm going to tell you something, but you're not going to believe me. I said, what? Like, this guy is, I think for Brian is 5'11". So not a small guy. He's also like a thick guy, but he's also not huge. He said this guy can kill me with one hand behind his back. I was like, what? Because Chris, really, he's going to Santa classes, and sparring with very serious people. He wouldn't say of anybody lightly that they could just take him down with one hand. He's a very powerful guy. So I was like, oh, interesting. But he said, no, you're not going to believe me. You're going to on his Facebook and you're not going to believe me. I was like, all right. So send me his Facebook. And so we kept talking. So I go on his Facebook. What I see is this chubby looking, religious Jewish dude who dresses funny and goes to comic book conventions and to conventions with like B-movie stars to get their signatures and geek out with them over like the silliest shit and writes children's books about owls. I'm like, that dude? That dude? He says, yeah, that dude. I'm like, no way. So, since he's Jewish, it's easier, for us Jews to get talking together. So I got talking with him. Not at all interested in studying with him, not because he's not good. I didn't even know what he was doing, right? Mm-hmm. It's just Chris has said so many wonderful things about this man. He had looked interesting. I'm curious because he's this hidden dragon. He has very little on his Facebook. He has a little bit here and there about martial arts. Same with the karate-gi from years ago and some very old photos. So we got talking and we befriend each other and we talk for about 6 months. And I tell him that, I started an iron palm practice, which I regret not having started earlier. And he tells me, oh, we have the iron, my lineage, we have iron palm and this. And I told this guy and, a lot of people come to me to study iron palm and because, they hear that they have this, but, I'm not that, happy to teach it because people are just, some people are clowns and some people want to use it for bad purposes. They want to just do this so they can take revenge on someone or they're just going to be overzealous and injure themselves and all sorts of problems. So he's not at all happy. Like he's on one hand, Shifa Brian, he's looking for people to be serious disciples and really get in and deep in his martial arts. But on the other hand, he's been disappointed with a lot of people over the years who seemed serious at first and then, went their own way eventually and wasted their potential. So after about 6 months for this iron palm thing, we decided like maybe I can help you write a book because he's just so busy. He can write his own books. But he's so busy. As for little kids, he's a wonderful family man, a father. And I can help you write that book about iron palm and you can teach me I was looking for Qigong to accompany the iron palm because there's special types of Qigong that help you keep your palms flexible and healthy and for the palms not to stiffen up and for you to not get arthritis from that type of practice. Yep. And I didn't have anybody to teach me this type of Qigong and he knew a fantastic Qigong for that. It's called the Jade Turtle Qigong, Jade Turtle Qigong. Very interesting type of Qigong from Shaolin. Very simple to learn, by the way. And so he started teaching me that, and that's how we got rolling. And eventually from that into his Li family martial arts, not just that Qigong, because he's very eager to teach. He's a teacher who's very happy, like to share. He just wants to share. He's very generous. So, yeah, we've been rolling things. We sort of, like the book is slightly on pause, but once in a while, as I progress through the iron palm, I add a little bit more and more into it. The iron palm book, that's like a project for 5 years from now, maybe. In the process, it also helped, we talk a lot. Sometimes we have 3-hour conversations on crazy shit like mythology and demons and whatnot. He's an expert on world religions and languages, and he's very interested in Hebrew, and he has studied very well biblical Hebrew. Mm-hmm. So he could, as a religious Jew, he wanted to understand the Hebrew Bible and its language of origin. That is why. But he can't speak much Hebrew, and especially not modern Hebrew. So I'm helping him with the Hebrew. He's helping me with my martial arts. most of our conversations, he's just telling me like tons of martial arts lore and teaching me about life. And, even though we sort of teach one another, he's my shifu. It's quite obvious. He's in his early 50s. I'm in my mid 30s, and still like he is a shifu to me. I call him shifu. I consider him my teacher. He's a very wise man, self-taught. He has some academic degrees, but he's self-taught on a whole lot of things. There's thousands of books in his house. Whenever somebody has thousands of books in his house and he's read them all, that's the person worth talking to. I know only two people like that. I know sort of three people. So I know Grandmaster Keith Kenspert. He has 4,000 books in his house. I've seen them. And I randomly opened books and I saw his notes. I know he's read them all. He really did. So that's one person. I know Shifu Brian has that many books in his house that he's read. Shifu Steven, I'm sure has read as many books. I don't think he kept most of them, but he's probably read as many books by the amount of knowledge the guy has. So, so the Lee family system, he was just lucky. He was taught since age 4 by his father. He was taught Goju Ryu Karate from a rare lineage from Okinawa that is quite, on one hand, the kata are sort of the same. Not exactly, but sort of the same as the mainstream Goju kata. But he has many things that most of Goju Karateka don't have. For example, he has, we're talking about the partner form Wing Chun. He has many partner drills that teach you how to transition the kata into free flow combat, into sparring.
That's awesome.
And that is quite unique. And also, he has been telling me that the original way to train kata in Goju Ryu is that the kata are only a template. The sensei is supposed to teach you how to take the different combinations from the kata and recombine them in any way you see fit for every single kata. And people have just forgotten about this. This wasn't taught. And he has that. And he has a few other things that are somewhat more internal in Goju that other people don't have. And then, so he was very good at martial arts already when he was in his teens. And somehow through connections, I think he was in college, and then he was living with Chinese Americans who spoke Chinese. He learned Chinese from them. He has a gift for languages. He's also, Shifu Brian, he was, I don't know if he's still, I think he was conversational in Cantonese, and he certainly knows he's Japanese. He can speak Japanese. And so other than English, it's also impressive. He knows English well, of course, it's American, can read and write well in biblical Hebrew. Now he knows a little bit of modern Hebrew as well, and can converse and read in Japanese, and probably can speak a little bit in Chinese. So he's not practiced in years, but used to speak fluently with his roommates in college. So I think it was through these Chinese connections, because he used to spend a lot of time in Chinatown. So he got into his shifu under the Li system. It's a family that sort of keeps its secrecy because they're involved with, let's just say, shady business in China. So if I'm not mistaken, there weren't even a Li family back in the day in China. They changed their family name. They're another common family name. The thing is, some people don't know, in China, they only have 100 or so common surnames that everybody uses.
Right.
I recently found out, for example, there's a famous scholar and general from the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, both historical and the book Romance of the Three Kingdoms, that a lot of people would know, called Zhuge Liang. And I thought that, so I was asking my Shifu Nitan, who also can read and write and speak in classical Chinese. I was asking him, so why is it a mistake that in English language books they call him Zhuge Liang, because Zhuge is 2 characters and Liang is 1. So I asked him, isn't this supposed to be the Liang Zhuge? Because usually that's how it is in Chinese. The family name is 1 character and the first name is 2 characters. He said, no, actually, it seldom happens, but there are very few examples of this. But Zhuge is a family name made of 2 characters.
Huh.
And it used to be more common in Japan. We see this in Japan. Most surnames, I think, most family names have 2 characters, not just the first names. So anyway, going back, So he got to study under that family, and that family has a system that goes right about like this. They have their Jibengong, and that Jibengong includes the Jade Turtle Qigong that essentially builds the basics for all the Neigong in their system. It's the Jade Turtle, and this form called Iron Arms Silk Bridges. Iron Arms Silk Bridges, or in Chinese that's Tieshou Siqiao. Tieshou Siqiao. Iron Arms Silk Bridges. And that is the form I was talking about that I actually put in Tongbudao. It's a new edition. I put it in about probably 8 months ago. And I told my students, well, this short form is kind of similar in some ways to Sionim Tao. That teaches you all the different bridges that you could use, nearly all possibilities in stand-up, empty-handed fighting, probably also in ground grappling. Every single way, basically every single useful way you can twist your arm in palm. All these different ways, and it just transitions between them, like one twist to another twist. So, and it's such a brilliant concept. So this is part of the Jibengong for the Li family system. So for Brian's permission, I just took this, put it in the beginning of Tongbudan, and I took my students on a weekend-long seminar. Friday, our weekends in Israel are Friday, Saturday. So Friday 4 hours, Saturday 4 hours. It's 2-hour classes with a break between them, so 8 hours total. I taught them the whole thing in 8 hours. I said, now that's like the basics before basics. That's what we do. It's so useful. I immediately saw the use for it, but I waited 6 months of me working on that form, so it'd be good enough to be confident to teach it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's only 6 months. Like I would have waited years maybe, but it's very close to a lot of things I studied in Sovereign Mantis. So it's because it's so close. It was almost like an extension. This form is an extension of Sovereign Mantis for me. Would work so well with Sovereign Mantis and Wing Chun and such and Pak Mei. I offered my Sifu, I told him, I would teach you that form so you can have it as Jibengong, because they don't have real Jibengong, in my opinion, in Jukum Sovereign Mantis. They jump into more advanced stuff right away, which is very confusing for people. And I told my Sifu, take it. I've never been able to give you anything in the martial arts. Take this. Please let me give it to you. So put it in the curriculum, and you have this thing. You've been searching for something like this to put as basics for students for years. Unfortunately, as of now, he hasn't taken it. Maybe in the future I'll convince him, but it would be extremely useful for his Sovereign Mantis students. Anyway, so the Jade Turtle, and then Yugui Qigong is the name in Chinese, and then Tieshou Siqiao, Iron Arm Silk Bridges. That's the Taolu, the form for the basic bridges. After that, they have a Wuxing Tren, or a 5-faced fist. In this context, Wuxing Tren is 5 animals. So they have their own take on 5 animals, which is a mix of several different 5 animals, both southern and northern. That they collect several types and they mix them together. So the tiger is several tigers they put together. The crane is several cranes. Then, after that, in the end, they have several weapons. All these systems have weapons, like the typical weapons, like the straight sword, the broadsword, the daojian, the qiang, the spear, the staff. All of these stuff, they come eventually, later. But after the Wuxing Tren, after the 5 animals, which is builds the core basics, they have a lot of stuff going on. They have a long phoenix form. They have a water form. It's like a proto Taiji. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of Taiji got inspiration from that. But the most interesting stuff that they have is the F5 birds, 5 bird styles. So every one of these is as long as the typical, say, southern white crane, which is it's not a big system. These southern crane systems relative to other systems. Some there would be, some of them are shorter than Wing Chun, let's say, in the span of the curriculum. But they have the 5 birds. He would smack me probably, you would not, because he's just sweetheart for Brian. But I don't remember all the bird names now because I haven't gotten to work on that yet. But there's there's a blackbird, there's an owl, there's a hawk, blackbird, owl, hawk, golden pheasant. Oh, and the black crane. Yeah. So blackbird, owl, hawk, golden pheasant, and black crane. These are the 5. And the golden pheasant is considered the most advanced. Chief O'Brien says that this is the most advanced internal system that he'd ever seen. And given that I have not seen it yet, I'm quite curious. And he's shown me a lot. It's not just, we have so much to cover. I haven't gotten to it. It will take a while. So after I skipped something. After the Yogui Qigong, the Jade Turtle Qigong, the Tieshou Siqiao, the arm silk bridges, there are also transitory stages where they take the basics and they show you, of course, how to apply them with your partner and this and that. There are a lot of parts that I'm not studying because for me that's redundant. That it's a level and it covers a lot of things that I know from many different other styles. I'm studying the stuff that is key to my development, which might end up being most of that system. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But for example, I'm not studying and if I had time, maybe, or if it was 10 years ago, I would have studied the Wuxing trend, the five animal fist. But currently I'm not studying that. So I am studying what is leading to the 5 birds, which is what Chief O'Brien really wants to teach. He sees like the highest thing that he knows that he really wants to teach on forward, even though he also highly considers his Gojo Ryu. He has some students who study that Gojo Ryu now. So to get to the 5 birds, I'm studying something called the wheeling hands. So wheeling hands are 28 combinations that you do standing, but you can also transition them between steps, free form. And these 28 movement combinations are some of the most internally complex stuff that I've ever studied. That's actually, that's almost just slightly over Jib and Gong in his Li family system. I would say all of these combinations are as advanced as any of the most complex movement combinations in a Chen long form, Chen style Taiji long form. This is very complex. And of course, there's a lot of transitory stages that I skipped to get to that, I'm working at the level that I need to work right now. But for me, that was complex. I'm at, of the Lunsho is willing hands that I'm studying. I'm at number 11 out of 28. And my hands are full with these 11. They are complicated and confusing. And when my students ask me why is it so complicated and confusing? And I said, because it would be complicated and confusing for the opponent. That is why. That is the point. If you master something that's super complicated and confusing and have it very easy for you, and you can make it work, then that's very extremely complicated and confusing for someone who's never felt or seen it, right? So I'm at 11, and I have to be good enough at these. I'm working on becoming good enough at these 11. So Chief O'Brien would teach me the next ones. And it's a complicated practice. I taught my students the Tieshou Siqiao. And they sort of studied the motions in 8 hours, but they are far cry from understanding that form. It's going to take them another 2 to 3 years, each of them. But the wheeling hands that I'm studying now, I can't teach that to my students. That's complicated for me. So that would take a while. And there's no way to simplify it. And what I really love about the Li family system, by the way, it works so well. These combinations, one of the first things I did, I immediately started applying them in freeform practice, like semi-sparring with my students. And everything worked immediately. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing.
That's a rare thing too. That's rare. Usually it takes there's a little bit of a learning curve to reach it out there, but that's great.
But it's very close. It's very close to the South Mantis that I did before in terms of overall movement. So I'm used to that movement concept, the way that close range. It's almost like the whole system is something between Pak Mei and South Mantis and Wing Chun. It's like in the middle between all of these. I'll explain it in a moment. Actually makes sense. So in terms of the history, so it's so very practical that I've changed none of it. And that's rare. Like the Tieshou Siqiao, that movement form that I put in the beginning, I changed nothing, but then I added like another third to the form just to add many different types of bridges that I know that are very useful that weren't there. But I didn't change any. I just added to the end of it, I added more. And that I use, that my students would be taught or have already been taught, that I wanted those bridges there that add to the total potentiality of all the bridges that you could use. But I didn't change anything before that. And in the willing hands, I absolutely changed nothing, and I see nothing that needs to be changed. It's so well structured. It is as well structured. The whole system is as well structured as Wing Chun. It's quite brilliant. And here's the history. According to Shifu Brian, he's my source on this. I can't verify this. But what he says is, way back when, we're talking centuries ago, there used to be a core founding system called the butterfly hands. Butterfly hands nowadays in the Lee family system is a concept. Now, why do I believe this and why do I find it fascinating is this is butterfly hands. So what some people call yin-yang hands, this pattern. Okay? The listeners wouldn't be able to see it on video, and it's a very I'm not sure you could verbally explain this pattern, but it's a pattern where both the palms twist.
It looks like Hyun Sao.
It's not this. Look, it's this. It's this. Look. It's this, and this.
Ah, yeah.
Here. Okay.
Yep.
So it's Bong Sao. What is this? Not Jump Sao. What here?
Fuk Sao?
Not the Fuk Sao, but when you just put your hand here. Like this.
I don't know. I don't have a name for that one. I've got Lan Sao. I've got Lan Sao.
It's kind of like, okay, so think like Bong Sao, Fuk Sao, Tan Sao.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you look at it, it's slow motion, and sorry for listeners not being able to see this, but it goes like this. So it's 1 and a 2 and a 3. So 1, 2, and 3. It always changes direction. So one direction, second direction. So it's essentially 1, 1 and a 2 and a 3. So you see how it's very Wing Chun-y actually, but circular, done in more circular. Okay, so essentially what I'm talking about here, butterfly hands, also called yin-yang hands, is a pattern where you swirl the palms in a pattern of infinity. Essentially, that's what it is. So infinity, it always keeps swirling. It doesn't have a beginning or an end. And this way of swirling the palms in a pattern of infinity is actually correlated with moving your middle dantian and your lower dantian in certain ways. So it's a waving motion of the spine as well as the middle dantian and the lower dantian. Sweetie, you need something? The dates? Here, have dates. Here you go. Wife is hungry. So I stole the dates before. What can I say? They're next to the microphone.
That's internal practice, my friend. Internal practice.
So going back on the butterfly palms, yin-yang palms, the amazing thing is I studied that skill as the main engine of the Chingchen Mountain Bagua that I studied under Shifu Stephen. And then a long time later, I find myself studying under Shifu Brian, and that is the main engine of his martial arts.
I see what you're saying.
Family system and our Shaolin, and have no relationship with that Bagua whatsoever. But here's the kicker, and I forgot. The Lee family system have a linear Bagua, and not a linear Bagua that they created like this Dong Hai Chuan Bagua lineages that then created like a linear practice of Bagua later. I'm talking, he has a pre-Dong Hai Chuan Bagua in the Lee family system. They have a Bagua, I forgot, that doesn't have circle walking. It has a lot of circle stepping, but no circle walking. Entire forms, no circle walking. And that, which uses a lot of the stuff that you see in the Five Birds and all the stuff, other stuff that I was talking about. And I showed Shifu Brian's Bagua to Shifu Steven. Shifu Steven's like, wow, that's very similar to our Bagua. I'm like, they must be distance 10 generations, 15 generations back, and they have the same engine. That is something. So that put things in perspective, and that made me believe more so Shifu Brian, even though I believe him because he's a trustworthy, extremely scholarly person who's deeply researched the history of his arts. And his contention is this. There used to be this style called butterfly hand or butterfly palms.
He has a book about that, doesn't he, Sifu Jonathan? I think he has a book about it, doesn't he?
Brian? No, he doesn't have. He has a book about the 9 gates, which is a book about, it's a theory of 9 gates in combat, but it's not about the butterfly palms. No, I should note, there are many styles in China today that are called butterfly palms, but none of them are this particular system. It's just a common name. And he says that system was brought into Shaolin, to one of the older Shaolins, because the Shaolin temple had several iterations. It was burned down or destroyed or abandoned several times because the monks there were heavily politically affiliated. So they would take in refugees from different militaries who lost, generals, or there were some soldiers, or they would actually raise an army and participate in different rebellions and such. So Shaolin, there's a reason the Chinese Communist Party took over Shaolin, made it into a martial arts Disneyland, because they wanted controlled opposition in our generation. They didn't want the Shaolin going back to its military roots because it was very politically inclined and typically against the ruling authorities.
Yep.
So when the butterfly palm system came into Shaolin, it was modified, of course, to suit the temple needs, and then changed and then broken down into several styles that themselves developed over the years. And then Shaolin spread out as a chain of Buddhist monasteries, much like the Juklum temples. The Juklum Southern Mantis Juklum is Julin in Mandarin, Julin or Juklum is bamboo forest. Bamboo forest is the name of a chain of Buddhist temples, a franchise of Buddhist temples that the originators of that system, just several generations ago, they would go around and build those temples and preach their lineage of Buddhism. That was the thing. The martial art was attached to that. Martial art was, there are bandits and robbers on the road that we need to deal with while we spread that chain of Buddhism called bamboo forest. This is why it was called Juklum, bamboo forest, Southern Mantis. And it's Southern, for those not in the know, it's Southern Mantis because there are also lineages of a mantis system in northern China, which is a very different martial art, just not related. So that's why the Chinese call it northern mantis and southern mantis. Anyway, so I used to believe, also after reading the book, The Shaolin Monastery by Professor Meir Shachar. Professor Meir Shachar, I actually met him. We sat together for a few hours. In Israel, we used to be, I'm not sure if he's still a professor at East Asian Studies at Tel Aviv University. And he wrote The Shaolin Monastery that's available on Amazon. It's the most comprehensive book ever written on the history of the Shaolin Temple. And his contention was that there was no Southern Shaolin Temple because these temples essentially were so utterly destroyed that no historical remnants survive, at least not recorded in the academia, that he could find. And he did a pretty decent damn job, Professor Meir Shachar, at tracking the history of Shaolin. Apparently there were, though. And so the oral traditions of the Southern Chinese martial arts are true. There were Southern Shaolin temples, not just one, but more than one. Perhaps, some of them were potentially tiny. Maybe they only had 20 monks. I don't know.
Right.
They weren't all as central as the big one we know today in northern China. But there were nonetheless. And then the Li family was a family that inherited from one of those southern temples the whole system of arts that they had at the temple at one given time. I'm not sure exactly when. If Shifu Brian could give better answers, I'm not sure. It's difficult to convince him to talk about this in podcasts. He doesn't want to get into martial arts politics. So they represent something that in his view was the older version of the Southern Shaolin, which is, in my belief, and I'm going to say something extremely politically charged here, the mother system of what later became Wing Chun, Southern White Crane, Pak Mei, Longying, which is the Southern
Dragon sign, yeah.
And Southern Mantis, all of them. So the Southern White Crane, the Southern Dragon, the Wing Chun, Southern Crane, Southern Dragon, Wing Chun, Pak Mei, and Southern Mantis. All these 5 systems, and of course, also heavily influenced Honga, which is a mix of Northern and Southern, if you ask me. It's like a Southern on a Northern frame often. I think that's how Honga looks like. And many other systems, by the way. So I think Shifu Brian, he's not the only one, because the Lee family are still out there teaching. It's just closed door somewhere. His Shifu is still alive. Some people are teaching. He's teaching that. There are probably some others in China or somewhere. Very few people. Some people out there have the mother system. Now, it's not better or worse. It's just that's the origin that everybody's been looking for. Like basically all of the karate people in Okinawa who've written history books trying to track, where these, like we came from this Southern arts, but where did they come from? This is Southern Shaolin, but how did that Southern Shaolin look like? I'm studying this. I think I know what it looks like, really. But, who's going to believe it?
Well, we've got it out there now, my friend. We've got it out there now. Well, my friend, I'm going to have to say this is going to have to be a stopping point for me, because my phone, I use my phone as my medium, is about to go out. But Jonathan, this has been so fascinating. I don't want to talk for my co-host, but I'd like to say that we'd love to have you back on the show another time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd love to be back. Yeah, it would be wonderful.
This has been super fun. Go ahead, Owen.
No. I was going to say in parting, do you have anything? How can people reach you to start with? And then secondarily, do you have anything that you want to promote or you want to work or you're working on, or classes or anything like that?
Well, okay. So, if you're keen on Zuckerberg's evil platform, aka Facebook, then I'm on facebook.com/Bluestein. That's Bluestein. Facebook.com/Bluestein. You can also write Jonathan Bluestein on there. You'll find me. Or Jonathan Bluestein. Jonathan Bluestein is Jonathan as JONATHAN. JONATHAN. .Bluestein@gmail.com. That's my email. Our official website is on bluejadesociety.com. It would change in the future to something else because I'm going to have a more Hebrew-focused website with an English version. But right now, it's bluejadesociety.com. Blue like the color blue, jade like the stone jade, society like a society.com. My books, I have 8 of them that I've written and published, and 9th one coming. I'm going to be publishing a 1,000-page long book in Hebrew about martial arts.
Wow.
It's going to be the most comprehensive book ever written in the Hebrew language about martial arts. Unfortunately, it's only going to be in Hebrew. Up until now, nearly all of my books were in English. A lot of what's in that book is available as free articles in English on my official website or available in my books. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, my books, which have been sold on Amazon for years, and some of them are bestsellers, Amazon has deleted my user account, which is also my author account, some time ago. It was probably an accident. I don't know if they shadow banned me, but it's probably an accident on their part. They doubled down on their claim that I asked for it. Like literally, that's their legal department. After I had to threaten them with my lawyer, which happens to be my father. Unfortunately, they were counting on me drowning in legal fees. But when your father is a good lawyer, then no, I'm not. You're going to be drowning in legal fees. And so they are claiming that I asked to delete my own account, which is utterly ridiculous. I've had a a customer user on Amazon since 2009 and bought a lot of stuff. And, I've been publishing books on Amazon since 2014. So for me to basically shoot myself in the foot is not a reasonable option. So
doesn't make any sense.
Since they doubled down on it, they just got a lawsuit. So hopefully Bezos wouldn't mind chiming in a few dimes in my direction. Probably if he does mind, the court will tell him to suck it up, Bezos. We're after you. And they have they're going to have a bad day in court. Let me tell you that. Unfortunately for them, they'll probably settle outside of court though, for various reasons. Not getting into it. It's a long legal discussion. Anyway, unfortunately, I think most of my books are currently not available on Amazon. You could potentially get used copies on Amazon or elsewhere. So you go on Amazon and you look. Some of them are written, good as new. So I guess you could get them. I don't get money out of that, but that's between me and Amazon later in court. Because they keep selling my used books and they don't give me money for that.
Right.
Well, anyway, that's how you can get to me. I am going to keep publishing book. There's a huge biography coming of a very famous martial arts master that is coming hopefully within less than a year. Hopefully we resolve everything with Amazon by then. It's going to be like 800 pages long. It's going to be amazing. And there are many, many more books coming down the road as quickly as I can write them, which is too slowly recently. I've been busy with Chinese medicine patients, but I'm trying.
You have a good YouTube page too, Jonathan. What is that?
Oh, yeah. So you just go on YouTube and write my name, Jonathan Bluestein, and I have a YouTube channel. Thank you for reminding listeners of that. I have hundreds of videos on there. I have my own podcast with martial arts interviews. I have my own lectures that I record on martial arts and Chinese culture. I have videos of my own teachers and myself demonstrating various things having to do with martial arts. Some of my colleagues, they donate videos and I put them on my channel. Lots of goodies on there. Jonathan Bluestein on YouTube, you'd find my channel.
Awesome. Well, thanks you so much, Jonathan. It's been a pleasure, and we hope to have you on again.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, you have a good one.
Have a blessed day, my friend.
I'll see you.